Hi, this is Greg Koopman. In the video today, I'm going to present a very common problem in many cubes, multidimensional, that people run into, and they really might not understand it and how to get around it. And it has to do with a aggregate called distinct count. And I'm going to demonstrate how this problem occurs, and I'm going to demonstrate how to solve this problem, or at least make it so it's not so prevalent to your users. Okay, so what is a distinct count? As this illustrates in this diagram here, I put in 3 different invoices or orders, and each one has a certain items that are associated with an extended sales price, and then a grand total, the number of lines, and the number of orders. So what analysis services does is it allows you to create aggregate metrics on different things, right? So you can do sum, you can do min, you can do max, you can do count, you can do distinct count. So as you see here, we have order 1, which is which has 3 line items. Order 2 has 2 line items, and 3 has 5 line items. So, but the total number of orders, you take the distinct order number and you come up with 3 orders, all right? And that's not as actually, for the computer to do that is not as easy as it is for the computer to just add them all up as like an additive measure, okay? Which would be using the sum metric like here. And same thing with extended sales. It's just an aggregate of a sum. But the distinct count internally in the computer, when the cube processes it and when you query against it, it's a lot. It can be very time consuming if you have a large data set you're trying to run the distinct count against. Okay, and that's where the problem lies. Some cubes don't have distinct count at all in them. This is something that your designer puts in based on the business needs. And so, for example, if you want to know what the average number, the average amount per order is, you would need that distinct count in your denominator, right? So there you need a distinct count. There's many ways where a distinct count comes in very handy in business. But some cubes don't have them at all for one reason or another. And those in your multidimensional cube, that cube will probably, in most cases, run pretty quick all the time, okay? But when you have the distinct count metric, again, against a large set of data, it can be very slow in its query response time, all right? So because of the heavy calculations to figure out just the distinct count, like I said. So that's what I'm trying to point out here. Now, sometimes the distinct count can hide from you. So let's say we had an average per order, right? Well, that's the average per order is a calculated number, but its denominator is a distinct count. So it's going to also be difficult. It's also going to have this performance issue associated with it. So just because it doesn't say distinct count in, or it's not the raw distinct count, it could be based on a distinct count and really slow down your queries. All right. So let's take a look at this. And what happens is people, okay, so maybe a consultant comes in, they create your cube, they have some distinct counts in it, and the cube runs beautiful, but all of a sudden you hit it and you ask for something, and all of a sudden it just doesn't come back for 3 or 4 minutes or whatever, okay? And it's like, what's up with this cube? I mean, is there something wrong with the server? People don't know why, okay? So that's what I'm here to explain, is the why part. And it really, most of the time, a lot of times will be because of a distinct count. Okay, but there are ways to work around this, and a little bit of training and setup will help enormously. So let's go into this an example here. So I'm going to go into Excel, and I have a pivot table, right? Now, if I go to this pivot table and I come into my metrics, I have these metrics. Now I know that my sales, where it says orders, where it says orders, that's a distinct count. And I know I have maybe 100 and something million rows in this entire cube. So it's a pretty thick cube. It's not a little tiny cube. So it has a lot of data in it. Okay, so, but if I come in here and I say sales dollars, now remember, that's a sum. So it just adds it all up. If I just click on sales dollars, look how fast that came back. Okay, incredibly quick, right? So sales dollars isn't an aggregate of sum like I showed before. And it's aggregating over the entire cube, which has what, 58 billion is that? I think $58 billion in sales. That's a lot of sales. Okay, so, but I know orders, this is distinct count. And I really hate to do this, but I'm going to go ahead, and I know what's going to happen. When I click on orders, it's going to take a long time for the distinct count of orders over all those, over 3 years of data, over millions and millions of rows. I just clicked on orders, and as you see, okay, it's starting at 6:30, and now when it comes back, it's going to fall right next to sales dollars. Now this is the one that makes your users crazy. Not only does it make your users crazy, when you're demoing it to your users, you go crazy because you know it's like, oh my God, this is awful. My users are going to hate all the work I've done, and you know what? It gives a very bad perception. So I'm going to let this run. When it comes back, we're going to see how long it took. We started at 6 minutes 30 seconds on my recorder here, so we're going to see how long that takes. But already, it's at 45 seconds almost. Okay, and that 45 seconds in most cases is way too long. But we'll let it go, and I'll be back. Okay, we're back, and it took a minute and 10 seconds, which actually surprised me. That was a little faster than I expected, but it's still slow. And some cubes are even slower than that. They could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you have a billion rows in there, it could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Who knows? But that's not what you want to happen. And what happens is in a cube situation, when you come into an Excel pivot table, initially, right? If I pulled that date into the filters, well, what date do you think is the default date here? Well, it's the default date, and the default for every dimension, unless you set it, is set to everything. Okay, it's set to all. So if I went, okay, it's set to all. The dimensions are all, their default is always set to all, which includes the date dimension, right? So if I pull the date dimension, let me pull up something like years, fiscal years. I pull that in my filters, okay? Look what it's there. It's set to all, which means give me all the data, okay? All the data. So all the data is for all the years and all the days. So what would happen? And so the first thing that happens when your users come in, they'll pull a couple things over. A lot of times they're not going to set that date initially before they bring it over. So what happens? They're always going against all orders, and they always have to wait that minute and a half, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, for the distinct count. If we're unlucky enough to pull a metric for distinct count over. Okay? But now let's pretend that I'm going to set this now to just 1 year, to 2008. Okay? Still pretty big, right? So now let's see what happens. So we're going to look at the counter, the timer. So here, waiting. Okay, that came back in like 30 seconds. Still took a while for 1 year, right? And again, remember, if you have a really big cube, it's going to take even longer. Okay, so the distinct count is not your query performance friend. All right, so how do we modify this so that the user doesn't have to go through this turmoil? Okay, but if we started the whole thing over again, so if we do this correct, okay, if we do this way, date should be in the filter, right? But since we don't have any metrics in here, if we go and set this and undo this and maybe set it to the very last date of 2009, so it's like yesterday's date or whatever our last date is, and I say okay, and now when I pull in the value of orders, right, it's only going to look at for 1 day, so it should be immediate, which it is, right? So let's say no matter whenever the date, let's say we set it up so that whenever the date isn't shown, it's always the current date. That way, if accidentally the person brings in orders, they're not going to wait a minute and a half to get their total orders number for, all 3 years, right? For the whole population. So it's because it's defaulted to the most recent date. Okay. And if they want to do more, fine. Well, they can come in here and they can, at least they're not starting behind the 8 ball, right? At least they're starting in a decent position. So now let's say they want to go see May. They come up here, they undo everything. They want to see May. You know what? May probably won't take too long. So there's May. Okay. So they're not getting killed from that. Even though they're using a distinct count, they're not getting killed by it from the all member of the date being the default. So as long as the all member, if we set it to 1 day, they'll never really realize it unless they come in here and say, okay, hey, I want to see all the number of distinct orders for all years. Well, when they do that, they'll learn that might take a while. All right. In this case, it's cached already, so it's not taking long at all. But what I'm saying, as you saw before, it does take a while if it's not cached. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to explain to you, is that the distinct count can really hurt you, because when it comes in by default into your pivot table, it's coming in and addressing all the rows in your entire cube, and that will be super slow. But if you set a default instead of the all member in the date dimension, for example, that's what I'm recommending in many cases, to something like the most current date, then you're not going to get that hit. And then your users won't be accidentally doing this sort of thing and really causing themselves problems. Where, yes, they do have to come in and maybe reset that date, but they're going to reset that date anyways on almost all occasions. They're not going to look at the all date usually, okay? Or it's going to be probably more of a outlier than a normal operation for them. They're usually going to look at the latest, day, week, period, year, generally, and maybe even 2 years. But they're going to start with the most current data first, the most current dates. Yes, also something else I want to note is that, yes, we're bringing back one cell of distinct count for maybe the entire cube. But let's say you brought it back, the user or yourself accidentally brought back every day of the year. Well, it has to calculate every distinct count for every day over the entire year. That could take 10, 15 minutes. I mean, so the more elements you have, dimension levels you have on the screen, and more cells you have to fill in with different distinct counts, the longer it's going to take. So, for example, when I came back with just one cell that for the entire cube that took a minute and 15 seconds, well, if that was divided by all the months and years of the cube, which would be 36 months, you can bet that would probably take 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. Okay, so this is a big deal. I haven't even, my examples are on the light side of it, not on the real most difficult performance issues. So I just want you to know that. So that's what I'm emphasizing here. We have to go now in and solve this problem in the cube, or you need to get your cube developer to go and solve it by adding a default date, single date, to as the default, and we're going to do that now. Okay, I taped the next section with the intention that the default date being the last date of Word data would be a good idea, and I didn't realize that there's a problem with it. And the problem isn't with the default member, the problem is with Excel pivot tables. So the next section here, I'm going to discuss how to set up the default member, which we're going to use later anyways for the real solution. I'll demonstrate why you don't want to do this technique and save yourself a lot of time. I mean, I spent a day trying to figure this out and trying to find why things weren't working right, and so I wouldn't skip it. I think it's valuable for other learning purposes, but also to really illustrate what the problem is, so you don't have to spend the time doing that problem like I did. Okay, as I described, I went into the date dimension and I went to put in some defaults for the default member, so it wouldn't be the all member, so we wouldn't get all that long time waiting when we pulled things over. So anyways, what I did was, since I figured we'd use a fiscal calendar as our hierarchy there, and so what I did was I made a I located the tail end of the date and the month and the year so that this hierarchy showed up nicely when I brought it into the Excel pivot table. So the way I did that was I located each one of these attributes here, and I set their default members. So the first one was full label. So I went into the date. I located these levels, and I went into the first one, and I pulled up the properties, and I went to default member. So that is right here. And I went into that to set it. Now you could do no custom at all, which is a default. You can choose from all the members that are already listed there, which is kind of hard coding it. Or you can enter an MDX. So I chose to enter an MDX command, which shows is this tail, date, full date, label, membership, item 0. So what this does is it goes to the very bottom date in the dimension dates, and that's what it's going to use. So that's what this does, and that's what that command does. So it's MDX, so you might have to either just use this or just use some MDX. You might have to write some MDX for this. Okay, then I went to the next one, which was fiscal month attribute, and I went into here, and I went to default, and I went properties, and I went to default member, and I did the same thing, but a little bit different. I did a fiscal month members item, so this would give me the last month. So the last date of the dimension is December 31st, 2009. So the last month is December. Okay, so that's what this is going to pull up. All right, and then the first one was fiscal year, and so I go to fiscal year over here. I pull up the properties. I go to default member, and I do the same thing. I use the tail MDX expression, and use fiscal year. So in this case, since the final member is again 2009, December 31st, this would say 2009 is the tail year. Okay. All right. So I went ahead and I crunched that. I rebuilt the dimension, rebuilt the cube, and then we went over to the back to my Excel spot. So if I start right from here and I create a new Excel spreadsheet from my cube, okay, and I drop over the orders, which is my distinct count, right? I get 10,702, which is the one for the December 31st date. Okay, I can validate that. I could have the date fiscal calendar as my filter. Okay, and this was a strategy to have that as the filter, and as you see, it's selected here. And then, as long as that's the filter, you can pull in like date key, and it just pulls in that one date. Okay, now the key to this whole strategy is all your templates you let the users use, they gotta have this fiscal calendar at the top. Okay, because if they don't have that at the top and you pulled in the date key, it's going to automatically show all the date keys, and we defeated the whole purpose of this exercise. Okay, it's going to take a long time. So you want this at the top. Now, this all seemed to work fine and dandy until you got to certain aspects of it. So I was trying to, get a strategy for how this would all work. So when I put down 2008 and 2007 and 2009, and I have it sorted by quarters, as you see over here, year and quarter, it comes out pretty good, right? Now when I go back and I take off the 2007, when I take off the 2007, I click OK, it comes in with 2009-94, which doesn't make any sense, because when we come here, they're both checked, and it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because all these are all checked. Okay. And now when I undo the 2008, all of a sudden I have 4 quarters. So something here is just not working right? Okay, when I put 2008 back on, if you recall the 10702, that's really just for that one date, right? Okay, so what happened was that I went to the internet to see if there was any sort of problems with default member, and setting a default member and then using it in Excel if there's any problems. Well, what I found was that there were. So I Googled it and I came across this article. And let me just kind of give you the website here. Okay, so this is a website, a Microsoft support website, unexpected result from analysis services when dimension default member. Okay, so if we go back to that and we look at this article, what happens is it illustrates the example that I'm trying to present here and the problem. So as you read through this, you'll see that it does some sort of in certain situations, it will do a subquery, a subselect, which causes it to overwrite the kind of the groups with the original default member, and that messes the whole thing up. Okay. And I was very disappointed in seeing this, of course, and because it just doesn't operate right. Okay, so although the intention we had was good and the logic seemed right, it doesn't work right. So now it will work right, and this will come up to the solution I've come up with, but and which I'll explain in a while. Again, so look at, as we see here, this should show 2008 and 2009, and it should show 4 quarters for each, right? But it doesn't. All right, it does when we do the all up here. It does work properly, right? But when you don't do the all, or I'm not exactly sure when it always happens, because sometimes it doesn't seem that sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. If I do 2008 and 2009, the problem it has, according to the article, was that if you do this, maybe this selection certain selections with the default member, which is 2009 1231. Well, let's run this without it. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the problem area. So we're just going to go 2008 and 2009, and we're going to see 2008 disappears and 3/4 of 2009 disappear, and all we're showing is where we originally had the 1072 for the 1231 2009 value. So although our filter doesn't indicate that. So what I do, according to the article, if you unselected that default, which we don't want to do, but just to show you what happens, if you unselect the default member and you say OK, then it will come back and will present the whole thing to you with 2008 and 2009. Okay, and so that came back fine with everything, right? As long as I get rid of the default. But of course, then I'm understating my Q4 of 2009. So that isn't going to work. So I had to come up with some different way of doing this, and use some creativity and see if I can come up with something that still makes an improvement for the user and performance. Okay, so let's look at the solution I came up with to solve this problem. Basically, I built the cube. I go into Excel. From my SQL Management Studio, I browse the cube and then I go into Excel, enable. Okay, so here's the cube. Now, what my goal is that, right, of the whole thing is that if I have a distinct count metric, the user doesn't just pull that over and all of a sudden it does some sort of, has to go out against the entire cube and take 3 minutes to come back. All right, so we know orders here is a distinct count, and we know that any percentage, quantity percentage, frequency percentage, sales percentage, all these are also based off the distinct count. All of those are going to be really slow. So when I click on orders, I'm going to bring it in. Now, what I want it to do is not bring back any data. Okay, so I click on it, and as you see, there's no data here. Okay, now, since there's no data there, well, we need to get data in there somehow. So let's do this. So now, what one of the rather requirements for using this for my users would be they must have this date hierarchy inside of their filter at all times. Okay, so I'm going to bring that filter in here. And what you're going to see in this filter is a hierarchy where we have the all, we have unchecked to filter, we have, and then the 3 years, right? Okay. Okay, so remember, you want to, the whole purpose is this so that we don't over our scope of data we bring back. We want to keep it constricted as much as possible, but still obviously try to get the answer we need. Okay, if we have to go full out, then we have to go full out and wait, but a lot of times we don't. So this is what the filter is going to do for us. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in the filter here, we're going to look at it again, and it says uncheck to filter. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to see, as long as that's checked, there'll be nothing in the orders. Okay, and the reason why is behind the scenes here, I set the date of these to a date that has no data in it. Okay, as you remember from the bug it has in it is that in here when I did the current date, when I did other things, I had to restrict it and not show the current date so it to work properly. So what I want to do here, what I'm doing here is I have this thing faked out that it's looking at a date that I don't have any data in anyways, so I don't need it checked, and then everything else works properly like it's supposed to. So I instead of putting the date, like the date here is really 2006 December 31st, which has no data in it, but I put down, I used the different label on it. So it said uncheck the filter, give it a little instruction. So if I click this off, then I go into what I want to go into. So let's say I want to go and look at the current month of December, which will of course include the 31st, right? Now I'm restricted my data to 1 month. I'm not going to incur the kind of wait time I would if I first brought in the orders without any filter on it, with a wide open scope of 3 years, which would take, a couple minutes to return the data. So in this case, I was able to control the user from shooting themselves in the foot. So now I have this for just 1 month, which is what I'm most interested in, the current month in this case. And when I hit OK, our wait time for the result won't be so long. As you see, it took about a second or 2 seconds to get my result. Now I can also come down here, and if I wanted to go into dates and show the label, full date label here, and put that on rows, then it's gonna take a couple seconds. It did, and now it breaks out each day of orders, the distinct count of orders by date. Okay, so you see I've restricted the date, and by restricting the date, my performance increases is very fast. Okay, so I'm trying to keep the user, and myself for that matter, from shooting myself in the foot by pulling in something crazy like 3 years worth of data, when I really am only interested in maybe a week's worth of data or a couple days worth of data, right? Now, what you want to do is make sure they leave this up here. You don't want them moving this back over here, because things get a little weird sometimes when you do that, so you just want them to keep it up there. So say uncheck filter if I don't want to see anything, and as soon as I click the uncheck to filter, it's no longer going to filter, and when I say OK, it's going to go back to nothing. Okay, so let's say we put another, while it's on nothing, I can go ahead and say, well, I'm gonna put all this stuff on here. Okay, so I'm gonna load it up. Okay, so it's gonna take a little while, but the distinct count is what takes the longest. We've already seen that doesn't take so long. So now, when I come back in here and I want to show that data, I uncheck that. Well, let's say I want to change a couple things first. Maybe I want to make it, instead of the whole month, I'm gonna just take off some of these days, right? If I can get my eye-hand coordination going. Okay, so I have like 20 days there. So now I'm going to click OK. And now, no, it doesn't work yet until I hit that checkbox that says uncheck the filter, right? As soon as I do that and hit OK, then it's all going to work. All right. And this controls your users from shooting themselves in the foot. And that's the whole purpose of this filtering mechanism I put in. Okay, because we've all been there, or not all of us, but many of us have been there, when you pull in one of those metrics and everyone starts off, most people don't care about seeing the entire gross income or sales or orders for the entire lifetime of the company. Okay, every day they come in and they want to see the current month or the current week or whatever. That's usually all they want to see, Then if they're doing deep analysis, they might want to see the latest 12 months. And if they want to see even more, they might do more. But really, they usually don't want to see that much data. But what happens inevitably is you do get yourself in trouble, okay? Now, if I want to go ahead and I did set it, and I wanted to see, I made an accident, and I clicked all of these boxes, right? Now, everything is checked. And I have all this data on here, and I'm going down to the lowest level, the day level. This thing is going to take 5 minutes to process. Okay? Now, if you accidentally do that, okay, sometimes the escape key will allow you to cancel the query. And sometimes it won't. Okay? There's no guarantee which way you want to do. So, yeah, it works sometimes, but you know what? It's better to think ahead and understand what you're doing here. Even with this fail safe I put in here, but you can still shoot yourself in the foot if you don't watch out. Okay, so that's about how that works. Again, your other filters will work fine. So if I want to put in here, let's say I come over here and I say, let's put in some sort of product. So I put in product category. Product category is going to really explode this thing. So again, I got to be careful. So why don't I just go ahead and change this to bring those dates down. It still runs pretty quick. You know, it just depends how big your cube is and what level you're at. So if you don't want to do any days here like that, one thing nice, you can just uncheck this to filter and you go back to nothing. Then you can do your play around and then check it and bring it back. Another way that also helps you, that's similar to that, is defer layout update, this button down here. Okay, I have another video that's I explained what's the best way to work with a pivot table with a cube against a cube, and to get the best performance. Okay, and it's going through some of the things I'm talking about here, of course, maybe not as in depth, but okay. So anyway, so I'm back here and I have my full date here. I'm gonna pull that off, and I'm just gonna put, I don't know, let's put quarters on here, fiscal quarter. And I know fiscal quarter, how many is in each year? There's 4, right? And how many is in 2 years? Oh, there's 8, right? So I know we have data for all that. So let's just come in here and be a little daring. And I'm going to click for both of those. Now, so what we're going to end up here after I do this, now uncheck to filter, it's still unchecked, so nothing's going to happen, right? So as soon as I check that box and hit OK, now it's going to execute that command. Now, that's quite a bit of data, but there's 2 things going on here. It's the amount of data, how many rows is underneath the whole that the engine has to go through, but it's how many times does it have to go through all that data. So if you only have 8 rows coming back, it doesn't have to go through that so much. So we only have 8 quarters coming back. So it will be less time than if I said the same thing for 2 years for 365 days each. So that would be whatever, 700 something days, right? So yeah, so what you have on your rows over here and how many rows are going to come back is a big determinant in your performance in this case too. So you got to be thinking a little bit. Again, I'm just using this unchecked to filter as a mechanism, as a kind of a fail-safe, so people don't come in and automatically shoot themselves in the foot. It will take a bit training to train them a little bit to say, hey, you got to have the fiscal calendar on there all the time. Okay, it's not too much to ask because you're going to need to filter by that anyways, by a date anyways, and it doesn't keep you from putting the same columns that you use in that hierarchy onto the table. So let's just go ahead and run this. We're going to get 8 rows back. We'll see how long it takes, and that's quite a bit of data. So we're going to see, it might take a minute or 2, but at least we know what we're expecting. So I'm going to click it. As you see, we get our hourglass. So it's going. I'm looking at the timer here. It's 9:42 in this segment, 9 minutes 42 seconds. So we'll see how long that takes. But at least we know what we're doing. It isn't like, you know, you're demonstrating to a crowd and you say, you know, expect it to come back right away. You can say, okay, yeah, this is going to take over 2 years, and we're doing a very strong kind of metric that takes a lot of CPU, and, you know, we're going to have to wait just a minute here. So just bear with us. So when you prepare people like that, then they know you know what you're doing. They know that you anticipate this time relay, and you're right on cue then, right? So, yeah, so we're at 10:32 now. We're at 50 seconds. And, you know, so I knew this was going to take a while, but I expect it will come back any second now. So let's see. We're at 60 seconds. And okay, we've got about 65 seconds on us to get that back. But the point is I know what is going about my, you know, again, like I said, I know about how long it's going to take based on some logical thinking. Okay, so that's that. So now, how did I do this? Now for the cube people here, how did I make the cube do this? All right. So let me just, now we're going to go into that. So you understand what the goal was, which is accomplished here. But now I'm going to show you how to do it in the engine. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. Basically, I alluded to it earlier, but I changed my view of how much data is coming back from my dim dimension. Okay, and so this is my view that I use for my dim dimension, and basically I take the min and max of the fact online sales, so that way I only bring back the data that the scope of dates that would include data. So my last date will be the last day the data was available, and my first day will be the first day is available. That's where you see this min and max here. Okay, so that way I don't have any extra fluff. I have a video on that too, on how to make a more friendly dimension, on how to do this, but you can watch that. But again, so here's the data on it, and so really this is what it was. It just got all my dates that I wanted, and only the ones I needed. Okay, so but I needed something that I could uncheck when I do the filter because of the way this default member thing works, where it doesn't like having that checked, and if it's checked, it acts very weird. It doesn't act consistently. Okay, so what I did was I took the date, all the dates that really count, then I took a union, and I union the date that's one day before all the dates that have real sales data in it. And I know that one date before the min date doesn't have any data in it. So that's what I did. So I concatenated them together, or union them together rather, and I came up with this new extra row of data. In that row of data, I went and I changed the full date label, which I used for my date label on the hierarchy, and I changed it. Instead of showing, in this case, it would have been 2007 or 2006 12/31. Instead I wanted that to say unchecked to filter. Okay, and then in the fiscal year label, I did the same thing, unchecked to filter, and also in my fiscal label, month label, I did the same thing, and that's why you see that hierarchy when it comes in. When you see that hierarchy right here, the uncheck to filter, which is really going against the first day of 2007 minus one day, which is 2006 12/31. Okay, that's really what that represents. And I know there's no data, so I can uncheck it and be happy as ever, and all the data is right still. Okay, when I check it, okay, it makes it the default, and basically that's going to mean that the rest of this will not show up, right? So if I click there and I click OK, everything disappears. Okay, so that's how it works, as we saw before. So let's go back to the view. So that's the view I'm working off of. I got that extra date. Now let's see how I do that over in the. So my modifications I made from the earlier section in my default members for these guys, I had changed a couple little things in here, but nothing that's different in logically. This I think I changed the months to show month 1, month 2, month 3 instead of January, February, March, something like that. That's about the only change I made in here, very little. But the main thing I changed in here is a little bit of the MDX. So when I go to these three, here's my hierarchy, right? So this is for people that know, we're in Visual Studio with the SSAS project going, and this is my cube, and this is my dimension area. So when I come in here and I go to full date label, and I do an F4 and go look at its properties, and I go to its default member, right? I think in the last one I had done something with a head, with a tail, but here I wanted it to be the first thing in the thing, so I used it's basically the same, but because of a couple gyrations I used the same thing. So basically I'm using head instead of tail in this case, just because I've changed the sort order based on the different attribute I use for this. And so that's the head versus tail. So basically, if I go to month label and I look at it, I'm using the same concept, the same kind of MDX expression. No big deal. And then, of course, it is a big deal because this is what makes it work or not. Okay, so if you don't have that, you can forget about this thing working. And then if I go to fiscal year label, which has the same thing, and you see fiscal year label, and it's saying give me the first one of all the children of the all member and all this MDX stuff. So if you know MDX, you'll get that pretty easily. If you don't, you need to learn some MDX or just copy this and try it out. So that's it. That's really all it is. It's basically the same exact thing as I had done with the previous one that didn't work, where I used the most recent date that had sales data in it. The only difference is I am finding the earliest date that does not have sales data in it, and that logic allows me to uncheck that box, and therefore the pivot tables bug that occurred in the initial solution is solved. So that's how it works. Thank you.